With Ashish Prashar, who is in New York for us. He's a political strategist in the United States. He's also a former advisor to the Middle East peace envoy and a former political strategist for the Biden campaign. Ashish, thanks for talking to us on TRT World. I just want to ask you about these aid agencies calling for a resumption to humanitarian aid, continuing to be stuck at the borders. Exactly what options do you think they have? What is the role of diplomats in trying to restore this humanitarian access? And what is the role of the international community in its failure to be restored?
I mean, the reality here is the UN has failed us. Our international institutions have failed us since the beginning of this genocide. They have done little to nothing to actually ensure that there be guaranteed aid into the Gaza Strip and into Palestine. They have buckled to pressure from the United States, whether it be threatening to fund or threatening to strip funding or threatening other programs that they have around the world. I remember Antony Blinken once said, if we helped the Palestinian people, we would have to starve the world because the US would have to pull out of the UN in a private meeting with Palestinians in the United States. And that is the kind of pressure that they've been under by the US. But the world is bigger than the West. The world is bigger than the United States. Look, we have to look at neighboring nations like Egypt, who should be forcing the border down, knocking the door down, and frankly, bringing on whatever the result is, whether it be from Israel or the United States, because the world is behind anyone who's trying to deliver this aid. Right? They are on that border. They have also recently moved, frankly, troops to the border. And aid agencies, if they tried to forcefully enter with the support of a neighbor like Egypt, with support of neighboring countries in the region, I don't think they'd have the same resistance from the United States as people want to believe, because I don't think the United States wants a fight with the entire region over this aid.
Ashish, it's difficult to watch these pictures and talk to people like yourself and not feel this overwhelming sense of helplessness in this situation. Look, I want to talk to you quickly just about this buffer zone. What are your thoughts on that? What do you think the effects will be, both in the short term, but also potentially if Palestinians are allowed to return to their homes?
Look, as war criminal and international fugitive at this point, Netanyahu sits in D.C. trying to package ethnic cleansing and genocide as voluntary migration. The Israeli occupation right now, as you just pointed out, are using US and UK weapons to mass murder Palestinians, specifically targeting Palestine's future with their children. This isn't genocide anymore. You and me and everyone watching know this is the Holocaust. Netanyahu announcing a new Morag corridor to divide Gaza is simply a land grab, a way for permanently settling Gaza, steal more Palestinian land. This is European settler colonialism in action. This move effectively aims to divide the Gaza Strip with the aim of making it easier to continue their ethnic cleansing. We're already seeing that this corridor is being used by the occupation to prevent Palestinians from returning north, to prevent them from finding any shelter that is left, and execute Palestinians, including entire families, in the field. Look, the idea of Israel has always been a numbers game. How do you maintain Jewish supremacy, a Jewish majority on stolen land? You import Jewish citizens from across the globe and tell them they lived there 3,000 years ago. How do you keep Palestinians out of their home? You create ever-shrinking concentration camps in both Gaza and the West Bank. What do you do when Palestinians refuse to leave or back down? You murder them, you ethnically cleanse them, then you weaponize the Holocaust as a forever argument for self-defense. This is Zionism in a nutshell. They are not creating a buffer zone. We're seeing the same thing in Syria. They're not creating a buffer zone. They're using not so creative language to try to hide what they've effectively been doing since 1948, which is murder Palestinians and steal their land.
With respect, Ashish, you've painted some very broad strokes there. I just want to press you specifically on these buffer zones and their immediate impact on Palestinians as things stand right now. What is their likely effect in that regard?
Well, they are trying to shrink the zones Palestinians can live in, right? That is part and parcel of ethnic cleansing. You only have to look at the same ethnic cleansing practices that you've seen in Bosnia. You've seen the same thing in Rwanda. You shrink the places where people can operate in. You squeeze them. You either kill them in those territories, starve them to death in those territories, or they end up voluntarily, quote unquote, involuntarily actually leaving. This is why it's a continuation of ethnic cleansing. This is why it's a continuation of trying to steal that land from the Palestinians Palestinian population. There is no other reason for trying to divide Gaza up like this. This is not a buffer zone. They already have Gaza under siege. They already had it under blockade before October 7th, 2023. It was already contained, for lack of a better term. So the reality is that this is just an argument. This is a way to convince Western governments language to use to their publics that they are protecting themselves, that this is self-defense. But the reality is it is a quicker way to steal the land.
Ashish, I understand your position on where the responsibility for this lies. I just want to ask you specifically about these aid agencies who, as I said, do appear to have this degree of impotence when it comes to their effectiveness at the moment. Is there anything, do you think, that needs to be said in regards to the agencies themselves that maybe could enable them to be more effective in this situation and potentially in similar ones in the future?
Well, the reality is the aid agencies are staffed with people who want to go in. And the aid agencies themselves, all they need is protection to get in, right? The people there are willing to sacrifice themselves to go in, and knowing what the conditions are like to get in. The reality is who is going to aid them from entering the region? And, you could argue, should the aid agencies threaten other programs out there? No, but that's not what they're built on. They're not as violent as Western governments and Israel. They're not going to threaten other programs they have in other countries to forcefully enter Gaza. They need to be appealing directly to neighboring nations to escort them in. They need to be appealing to the United Nations to pull together a peace corps to get in. Remember, there is a Uniting for Peace Act available at the UN that would strip the Security Council of any veto powers, that has not been used by one single member of the United Nations. We have all these messages of solidarity from South Africa to Malaysia to Algeria to Brazil to every nation, frankly, that has been behind the Palestinians. But not one member of the United Nations General Assembly has put to the floor the Uniting for Peace Act, which only requires a 2/3 majority to gather a peace operation to go in any territory and put down peacekeepers so they could actually relieve the issue, whether it be starvation, whether it be war, whether it be any other conflict that's ever happened in the past. The last time we've used it, if my memory serves me correct, is during the Korean War. And the reason we had to use the Uniting for Peace Act is because we had two superpowers at the time, both members of the Security Council, who were continually vetoing any way to get to peace in that conflict in the 1950s. And what you have here is the same issue: a member of the Security Council who refuses to let the world intervene on behalf of the Palestinian people. And I'm asking countries, one member nation, to put that in front of the UN General Assembly. You will get a 2/3 majority, and we could send peacekeepers to Gaza to protect aid workers.
Ashish, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your thoughts. Really grateful for your time as well. Ashish Prashar, who is a political strategist based in New York.